And good evening. I hope you're having a beer. And
I am having a beer. I'm having a Hopeless Brewmantic.
when are you going to do that screening with that? That's you had those specially made for your next screening?
We did. So we did a screening with Liberation in July, the end of July, and now we're doing a screening tomorrow with 10 Mile, the other brewery in the film, and they made this special beer for us called Hopeless Brewmantic, which is an IPA, a nice crisp IPA.
Wow. Starting this off, at the tail end of this video, you had put up a screen that said, many beers were consumed in the making of this film, and many more should be consumed in the watching.
Amen.
So in that spirit, I think we all should go ahead and pop a beer and put her down in the glass. But when we do beers, we want to make sure that they've got this label called Independent Crafts. Mm-hmm. That's the label we're looking for.
Yeah, that one. Where is it? Right there. Yeah.
Okay, so tonight we have the honor of speaking with Chirsto Brock, producer of BREWMANCE. And BREWMANCE basically, and not basically, is about how craft beer began with a group of restless home brewers searching for something real and flavorful. It's become a global phenomenon of taste and the spirit of rebellion and innovation that exists in today's home brewers. In Long Beach, California, 2 groups of those home brewers will soon open breweries and bring their beers to the world. Of course, they already are open after this movie. God, that must have been 3 years long. Not the movie, but the progression of it. It's about a father-son team who grew close over making beer and a rock star looking for the quiet existence of a brewery owner. And tonight, this is Chirsto Brock, brewer of BREWMANCE. And how are you tonight, Chirsto?
I'm great. How are you, Norris?
Good, thank you. So tell us about the film. It's a great film and what it took to get this to the editing station.
So, I don't know where to start, but I like beer, but I'm not what you'd call like a craft beer aficionado. Like I like making films, and I just kind of felt like with craft beer, there hadn't been a film that had really like hit it, had really like talked about it. And because a lot of the films were about like Pennsylvania breweries or Rhode Island breweries, which is awesome, but it didn't really like kind of talk to the whole thing, the whole movement of craft beer, which the more research I did, the more I realized this is a pretty interesting like American phenomena. And because it embodies all these elements of creativity and defying authority and being entrepreneurial, which is quintessentially American. But also I think craft beer also coincided with America kind of waking up to flavor and taste. And I kind of figured, well, there's a film that should be about that.
How long has beer been brewing, basically, and where did it start?
Well, I think as you saw, beer started, people have been drinking fermented beverages forever. But I think Germany kind of like nailed that early on. I don't know what those Germans are doing, but they make some really good beer. And, the thing about like craft beer is that it grew out of this void where like the beers in America were just kind of boring. And it was all these big beers, these light fruity lagers like, Budweiser and Michelob and Coors, which is actually a very hard beer to make. But through the years, we sort of narrowed our focus on what beer really was. And what craft beer, the whole movement did was to like sort of explode that idea and say, you know what? Beer doesn't have to be that. It can be this and that and that, and can be all these kind of interesting things. And then, and it used to be all those different styles, right? I mean, before Prohibition, there were all different kinds of breweries. Like on every street corner, there would be a brewery. And they made all different kinds of beers depending on where they lived in the United States or in, wherever. And what craft beer did initially was to sort of rekindle that diversity that didn't exist in the 70s. And then, fast forward 40 years later, we have all these kind of crazy beers and, goat milk stouts, as they, you know, but like, and it's just kind of cool that like it took us having really kind of boring beer to just say, you know what, screw that. Let's make something that tastes better.
Why do you think the major breweries never? What's the big parallel difference between craft beer and what we find on the shelves and what we've had for all these years? Why didn't they manufacturers pick up on what we're doing today?
Because of this.
Because
it's all about money, right? Those big beer producers, they make good beer, but their intent is to make money. These are big corporations, right? So they get shareholders. They have to like figure out what the minimum food cost is, what their like distribution cost. But what's kind of interesting with craft beer is because it started with homebrewers who really were just interested in making interesting tasting beers. The impetus is a little different. So they're more about like, they want to make good beers that people will drink, not just beers that people will buy. And the other thing with craft beer is that whole wholesale model, which is like the big beers, right? They do it very well, Budweiser and all those, they get their beers to everywhere in the country. Well, the thing is, like, if you're making good craft beer, it doesn't sit on the shelf very long. Like, an IPA is meant to be drank like 2 or 3 weeks after it's made, and it's only good for 4 weeks, and then the hops start to deteriorate and the flavor kind of goes away. So that sort of shifted this whole thing from like, I'm just going to go to the supermarket and get my 6-pack of beer to, no, I'm going to get something that's like fresh and different in my local brewery. And that's what kind of craft beer has become, is like taking people out of supermarkets and putting them into like local breweries.
So do they compete with shelf space?
Not really, because so one thing I didn't talk about in the film is the whole sort of economic model of beer. You got to think about it. If you're selling retail, you get to sell your beers for full cost, right? But if you're selling wholesale, you have to move volume, and you can only sell it for 40% of what retail is, right? So the thing that's enabled craft beer to survive is that you have these breweries like, your brewery up there in San Juan, which is like, it's the people of the area who come to it and drink their beers. And the brewers get to charge $7 or $6, whatever, $5, $7 for a pint. If they sold that pint wholesale, they'd have to sell it for like $2. And that makes it kind of hard for like small independent brewers to make a living, to pay the bills, right? So there's been that, and that's the thing with big beers, that they're very good at making a lot of money, making a lot of beer, getting it to a lot of people, but having them drink a lot. Whereas craft beer was never really kind of about that. It was like, no, let's like hang out and have a beer that tastes like something crazy I've never tasted before, and hang in the brewery with the person who made it, right?
Yeah, with a
so
big tank.
You look, oh, there's the brewer. That guy made the beer.
Yeah, you can't guzzle that stuff. I think you're right. Well, of course you're right about that part. The rules of brewing, they
I don't
say.
know that I'm right, Norris. I'm a man with a lot of opinions.
Well, that's what you're here for. Please express them all. In the video, it says the rules of brewing. You don't have to follow the rules as a craft brewer. What did they mean by that?
So, I mean, that's one of the things about like home brewers and craft brewers. They kept sort of trying to test the boundaries. Like, what really is beer? Like, if you're German, there's a rule called the Reinheitsgebot, which is like beer can only be malt, water, hops, and yeast. That's all you can put in your beer. So Americans kind of looked at that rule and they're like, no, I want to put like hickory bark in it and mud from my grandmother's shoe because it'll taste good, And they kind of like redefined what beer is. And now, and so now what's happening is a lot of those German breweries are coming back to American craft brewers and going like, what do we do? How do we get people to drink beer again? Because they're like, their business is kind of going down. So, but by like reinventing what beer is, we've made it interesting again.
I went to look at the brewery count and the increase from 2015 to 2020. The amount of breweries have gone from 4,800 up to 8,800. I mean, that's more than double.
Yeah.
And it's just amazing. And the supply route of these are like the hop story that you showed. Who's providing all the hops?
So, it's interesting. Like hops only really process a few places in the country, like in New York. Well, in Oregon, Washington is because they're higher up. They have really longer summers, so longer sort of days. And Yakima is perfect because it has this soil that drains really well. It's all volcanic, so they get a ton of water. So hops are like this weird sort of plant that weird plant that needs these specific things. And when those guys up in Washington and Oregon knew that their hops grew so well, they started experimenting and doing like crazy hybrids. The whole thing of Mosaic and Simcoe. I mean, that was like they didn't really mean to come up with a hop with flavor, but when they did, they were like, "Whoa, check this out! This is pretty cool," And that kind of like that's kind of defined American craft beer, right? The IPA, because that's kind of a new thing that hasn't existed before. And it's because people got these crazy hops and had flavors that they could do things with. Mm-hmm.
That's one part of that video was they spoke when they first tasted beer with hops in it. It was as if they said, I think it was a cat ate your bag of pot and then peed on your Christmas tree. That's gotta taste bad. Come on.
And yet we love it. Larry Bell is like the coolest. The guy from Bell's Brewery. That guy is like a character. So I'll tell you a really quick story. So from Larry Bell. Sorry?
No quick. Pull it.
All right. So he was a home brewer and he just loved brewing beer so much. And like you said in the movie, like he would sell it out of his like basement because he said he made so much beer. He's like, I gotta get rid of this beer. And then ultimately, and he kind of figured out like, oh, people will buy my beer. And then he went through some crazy stuff. He was like, there was a while that you couldn't sell cans or bottles, so he would like fill up these people's like plastic jugs, and they would take it home.
Ziploc bags.
It was that was like. But it's like people like that, people like Larry Bell or Fritz Maytag or Ken Grossman, who are just like these awesome, irascible, smart, anti-cultural, countercultural people who just were like, you know what? I don't care if you think my beer tastes bad. It will taste good to you at some point, and you want to drink it.
I love the black and white videos of the homogenized America and their discovery that something is fake. That is so neat. The way you took those black and whites back World War II area, everything's homogenized and packaged in Swanson TV dinners. And boom, somebody said, this is not right. We're doing it different. Where did you get all that footage from?
So actually, the thing is like being a documentary filmmaker. Yeah, you got to try to pinch pennies where you can, and I think we got a lot of that footage from the public archives. And actually some of that stuff came from like this educational video on food production in America in the 50s. But I mean, basically, we're not dealing with huge budgets here,
Yeah.
So you gotta kind of look hard. So we found a lot of stuff that was like, yeah, just kind of like publicly available. We had to license some stuff, but that's the advantage of a good archival producer.
Which you are. How much does it cost to make a brewery? I mean, for example, one of those who bought that 89-cent store, put all that into it. What does something like that cost for all those parts? And they didn't even have any labor. They all did it themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, the Sunstroms were like, I mean, you saw they had an inheritance, so they had a little bit of coin on their side. But I mean, I would guess that like to build out a brewery is anywhere from like $250 to $700.
What's the return on investment, you think, in a small brewery like that?
I think it's pretty good. You know, you're not going to make money the first year, but the second, once people start drinking your beers, and if you make good beer, they'll come back and drink it.
Being a craft brewery,
the thing is, like once things are built out, $20 or something like that, and it can cost you $175 to make. So once you start like figuring things out, making good beer, having people come to your brewery and drink it, you can make a pretty good living, you know. But the thing is, here's the deal: you'll never be like Budweiser or Ballast Point, because in order to make your beer good, you have to be there and you have to sort of pay attention. And it's not like you can franchise it around the country. People are going for your beer at your place because you're there, and they want to taste like what you just came up with, you know.
What are the tax advantages in being a micro? Have the government given them advantages over the big guys?
I don't know the answer to that. But I really don't know.
Are they limited to the amount of brews they can put out to keep that status of a microbrewery?
No, you know, the status of being like a craft brewer is defined by the Brewers Association. And they used to define like being a craft brewer, you produce less than 1 million barrels of beer a year, which is a lot of beer. But then Sam Adams started to grow bigger, and they started to make more beer, and then the Brewers Association kept raising that definition. So now, if you make less than 6 million barrels a year, because I think Sam Adams makes 3 or something like that. I mean, you know, in comparison to the big beer, which Budweiser makes, I don't know, 200 million barrels a year, something like that. I mean, they're still pretty small, but you know, I think craft beer is catching on, and these craft beer brands are becoming big time, you know.
Should we be concerned if the big boys turn around and try to make the same stuff under their label?
No, God bless them, because more good beer is great, right? If they can make good beer, great. You don't have to drink Coors Light all the time. You know?
Hey. What in the video, the 10 Mile Brewery, they were up there at the 10 Mile Creek, and he was saying something about the ministry of Hume. What was that?
Well, so the Sunstroms are a very convicted family of faith, and they are what they would consider themselves some pretty serious Christians. But I think what's kind of interesting about the Sunstroms, just like craft brewers saying, you know what, I'm going to ignore your rules. Like, those are your boundaries. The Sunstroms were like, so Christians don't like craft beer. Well, we're Christians and we like craft beer. We're going to make some craft beer. And I think people who are of strong beliefs but don't necessarily proselytize, you know, they don't go out. None of the Sunstroms is like trying to convince anybody to believe one way or another, but they really do like care about people. And so having a craft brewery was kind of a way to sort of share that.
So funny.
You know, which is like kind of it's a very respectful way of being a person of faith and spreading your ideas without telling people what they should believe. You know? That's what I would say.
That's amazing. Rocky Mountain Spring Water and Coors. Was that ever for real? Did they ever use
Oh, yeah.
spring water, or they just take it right out of the tap?
No, they use real. No, it's the mountain water, and that's part of what makes Coors special, right?
How do they get it? They
I don't know. They maybe just put a little pipe up to the mountain spring. I'm not quite sure how that happens.
I don't know. It just doesn't seem real.
I don't know about you, but I remember my uncle in the 70s. You know, I'm in my 50s now. My uncle in the 70s was like, I got some Coors. And he was so excited to tell us. He was like, I got Coors. And I was like, is that great? Okay, good job, dude. I was like 10. I'm like, I don't drink beer. Why is that? Okay. It was a big thing, like in Pennsylvania, to be able to get Coors, which came from Colorado. It's like, ooh, it's the holy grail of like light fruity lagers.
In the video, all the brewers really love cooking. And what is the correlation between food and brewers?
Norris, I'm losing you here.
Yeah, we've got some data. Anyway,
cooking.
They were all cooking in their kitchens, and they loved cooking. Yeah. And you had pointed out there's a very large connection between food and people that brew beer.
Yeah, there is. Because I mean, like I said earlier, I think, you know, in the 70s, we Americans were very like parochial, and you know, we liked franchises. We liked fried chicken. You know, there was our, you know, we liked beer that was like Michelob or Budweiser. And then what happened is that we started to realize, like, oh, there's a whole other world out there. Like, what? An espresso? What is that? You know, or cappuccino? Oh my God, I can get a cappuccino. Well, it tastes so much better than that horrible diner coffee that I've been drinking. And at the same time, you know, like, food became a thing that we could all get into. Then, like, the whole concept of being a foodie came about, right? I mean, the Food Network came out, and then all of a sudden there's like Emerald going bam, and we're all like, oh wow, this could be like that. And so I think, you know, the same thing with craft beer. A lot of people who liked food and liked flavor and were sort of not content with all the stuff that we had, the TV dinners and whatnot, or the franchise restaurants, were like, you know what? I like food. I like flavors. If I'm going to make beer, I'm going to make it the same way I want to eat food, which is like flavorful, interesting, and fresh, and, you know, made from real ingredients. I think it just sort of paralleled that whole food progression, taste progression.
Rice versus barley. Big guys use rice, and the little guys use barley. What is your opinion on either one of those?
Well, so I did some research before I started making the film, and it turns out, like, the original recipe for Budweiser, they added rice for a little bit of sweetness and lightness. But when they first started doing that, putting rice in the beer, rice was more expensive than barley. Ooh. So they did it because they liked the taste of it, and because they thought that it added a certain lightness to it. But and this is the thing about, like, big beer. I mean, it's easy to bash those big producers because they're so good at what they do. But, like, the rice that they put in the Budweiser now is from the original recipe, but it turns out that rice is actually cheaper than barley now. So,
is the taste difference?
Yeah. It sort of lends a sort of like crispness and a lightness to the beer. Yeah, that it's like, whereas like the barley can be a little bit heavy. Like in those heavy stouts or IPAs, you have a lot of malt, and that's the sugar from the barley. And I'm talking a little bit out of my rear end here because I'm not a brewer. The rice definitely, like, lightens up the beer.
When we say independent, what makes it independent? Independent from whom? And when are you
Independent
no
beer?
longer independent? Brewery, an independent brewery. What makes them independent?
Well, because they're basically in it for themselves. They're, a lot of these places are just one-man bands or one-family bands, and I think we Americans are getting more towards this artisanal sort of tip, which is that we want to know who made our clothes or who made our shoe, whatever it is. We're getting a little bit away from just buying what's cheapest, and I think you definitely see that with craft beer like that sort of. So the independent label is really just a bunch of small businesses trying to survive and make something that they like to make, and they hope that people will buy.
The story on this 98-cent store when they opened it, and the 10 Mile Brewery. I mean, their first batch, and I went to their website, and I mean, they've got over 32 different beer flavors.
Yeah.
Well, it's the bandwidth on your side, I think. It's a long way. Back? Are we back?
We're back.
They've come back with like 38, 40 different brews, all available at once from a startup with one little tank. I mean, it's amazing.
Well, that's the thing, right? You start with like a couple of beers that you like, and then you start to get inventive. And then also you realize that people show up and they're like, I want a blonde ale. So then you make a blonde ale, or oh, we can make a wheat beer. Let's make a wheat beer. And then before you know it, you have this big sort of diversity of choices and flavors. So it's kind of cool. Do you like craft beer?
Absolutely.
So do you go to one of the are you up in San Juan?
Yes, we go to the brewery up the street, and we've got another one down here. It's San Juan Brewery.
Yeah,
they're world renowned. It's just amazing. It's the interior. It's just exactly that concept you were talking about, and it's so family oriented. I mean, the kids are playing out there, and the adults are having good beer. They got terrific food.
Which is the best way to enjoy your kids. With a beer in your hand.
Hey, here
knock yourselves out. Here.
How long did it take to publish this documentary? I mean, it from the beginning of these guys in their garage all the way to 500 different brands of beer, and you finally ended it. How long?
So, well, the thing is, I have to say, as a filmmaker, I have a horrible business plan because the film just takes too long to make. And so I think we started in September of 2016 and first shoots, and then we finished it in February of 2020, just before everything closed down. So wow, it's 3.5 years. So we shot for 2.5 years, and we edited for 18 months. Some of that was overlapping. Because the thing is, the films like these, you find in the editing room. I mean, every documentary you pretty much find in the editing room, but we had some challenges we had to sort of try to piece together. Yeah, it just takes a while.
The way you captured the stress between, they were just building it and they didn't have a plan to distribute, and you were had your camera way behind the back, and one of them walked out. Yeah. And I mean, I thought it was going to come to blows, and the way you were way back there to say, if they know this camera's out, they are going to go to blows. The way you handled that was really great.
Well, it's those little scenes are when you're shooting them, you're like, oh my God, something's happening. This is awesome. But then at the same time, you're really conscious of if I bring this camera up close, these guys will stop talking and they'll notice the camera. So it's always this weird balance of how close can I get? And I mean, Eric turned off his microphone, so it was hard to get his audio and stuff. But that is, I had the same experience in the last film I did, which was another fight on a pool deck, and I was shooting there, and I was like, God, how close can I get without like being like that idiot cameraman? But those scenes are like, when that happens as a filmmaker, you're just like, oh my God, this is okay. This is great. This will make the film. And you just hope that you got it all on camera, you know?
Interesting example of the potential lawsuit on LC, where everybody was just happy and friendly coming out of their garages, and all of a sudden they became famous, and now they were threatening the other breweries instead of holding hands and singing "Kumbaya." Whatever happened to that potential lawsuit with LC?
Well, so it just turns out, I mean, the end result is that it just kind of went away a little bit. I mean, I showed the film to Julian of Beechwood, and that's the other thing, is that, you know, like I have friends with a lot of these people. I have relationships with everybody in the film, so it was a little bit of a dilemma. Do I make Julian the bad guy? And Julian's a really good brewer. He's a good man, you know, subjects for liberation. So those guys were majorly suffering because some business decided to, like, you know, impose their will. And but also I think the reason I put that in the film and featured it the way is because I wanted to sort of show that the world of craft beer is changing a little bit, because now there is a lot more craft brewers out there, and you can't just open up a craft brewery and expect people to come. Like, your beer has to be good, and it's becoming a business. You know, it's become, Beechwood is distributing around, you know, different states, and they want to protect their business interests, which is a little bit of a shift from like the, hey, we're all doing this together. It's okay.
Kumbaya.
Yeah.
A point was made about marketing, how if everybody is equal, the only way you're going to go ahead is it was an example of a car going 200 miles an hour. And if you went to the next step, you're going to spend 10 times as much money in marketing, 10 times the next step, and exponentially more and more. Are the breweries, are they just going to fight for shelf space, or the reclamation, the ones that do distribute? When does that stop? And they spin themselves out?
Well, I mean, I think every brewery has to kind of make a decision, like, how much are we going to sell retail here at the brewery, and how much are we going to try to wholesale? And if you want to go wholesale, you gotta go all in. You got to build a huge brewery. You got to move a lot of product. Then you also have to have relationships with different beer shops or, you know, liquor stores, and that becomes like a business. And I do think, I mean, I know 10 Mile, I don't know that they want that. I think they would rather just be a smaller brewery that makes beers that they sell on premises. Now they have two different locations, and, you know, they're selling full retail, and I don't know that they think it's worth their while to try to get wholesale and put those cans on shelves. I mean, it would probably help their visibility, but I think they kind of made a determination. You're like, no, it's not worth it. We're gonna do our thing, and that'll be enough. Mm-hmm.
At the end of it, who was the band and the ending song?
Real Big Fish.
Is that who it was?
Yeah. So that was the band that Danny was in, right? Liberation.
Ah, so he was the guitarist?
He was the trombonist.
Oh, yeah. That was a great band. I mean, they really were good. And he quit that to be a brewer.
Yeah. I mean, like Danny said, I mean, Danny, I love that guy. Danny is like one of the smartest guys you'll meet. And he used to tell me that towards the end of his time in Real Big Fish, he would just sit in the back of the bus and read. I mean, he would read, and then he would go out and visit breweries. But I mean, it's interesting. Like, this guy was a rock star. I mean, for 20 years, he toured with Real Big Fish, which was a big deal in the ska world. But, you know, you're never getting rich. It's a little bit like being a craft brewer or a small business owner. It's like, you know, you made a living, but he didn't have a big nest egg when he was done. He was just a guy who used to be a musician in a rock band. You know, that's why he's working. He's still working for the chancellor's office at the Long Beach State System College System. Yeah.
Well, this is really it's a very feel good movie. I mean, it's like how can you not be happy? I mean, it takes your mind off of things. It's like being in a brew pub for an hour and a half, seeing other people enjoy beer, and I mean, it's just really a great feel good movie, and we sure appreciate you letting us show it.
You know, the thing is, I have a lot of my colleagues who make like what I call save the world documentaries. You know, people are like exposing the ills of the world and, you know, giving light to subjects that should be given exposure so that we can change things. But my whole thing is like, hey, the world's pretty great. You know, why don't we just focus on what's good and what's awesome in this world that we live in. Watching a movie, if you're not having a good time watching a movie, you gotta wonder like, why am I watching this movie? You know, otherwise, if it's like, you should be entertained, and if you're not, I don't know, we should be watching the film. Personally,
it's a great video, and we can't again thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thanks, Norris.
We're gonna have a beer right after this is over.
Y'all should have a beer, and I'm sorry. I hope everybody had a beer while they were watching this. If not, you should grab one now.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Norris.
Bye-bye.